Welcome to the second part of my Backgammon tournament. If you haven't seen part 1, be sure to click the link at the end of the video. In this match, we were playing to 7 points. In the first game, my opponent hits 3 of my blocks early and doubles me. I was able to buy some time when I managed to catch one of my opponent's last pieces. However, this backfires a few rows later as her captured piece now recaptures my remaining 2 pieces in a single row. I am now in a very dangerous position and could lose up to 6 points. With just 3 blocks left, my opponent has a 1 in 6 chance of rolling a double, and in the process, winning a backgammon that is worth 6 points since this game was doubled. The fate of my entire tournament life now depends on the dice, and thankfully my opponent doesn't roll a double. I still lose this game, but I only lost 4 points instead of 6. The second game was a really quick game, and it took probably only 6 minutes for the entire game. I managed to hit 2 of my opponent's pieces in her home board and managed to develop a strong home board myself. As a result, I quickly doubled my opponent and she passes. The previous game was the shortest game, and now this game is one of the longest games that I've ever played. Early on, the same sequence happens twice when I roll a 6 to get off the bar and manage to hit one of my opponent's pieces on the 7th point. And as a result, I get an early lead. A while later, and I get the absolute best roll with a 2 and a 6. With that, I managed to hit a piece on my opponent's home board and escape. Now it is definitely too good to double as I have 5 of my opponent's pieces in my home board. And there's quite a good chance that I could win at least a gammon. I began to celebrate mentally, but it was very short-lived. My opponent manages to roll a 1 and hit my piece on the 1 point. On the very next row, I was stuck on the bar. Another row later and my opponent has suddenly taken ownership of my bar point and my 3 point. All of a sudden, it went from too good to double to just good enough to double.
Oh yeah.
I decided to double my opponent now and my opponent takes it. Later on, I managed to develop a nice prime, which forces my opponent to crunch in her home board. With my opponent's home board crunched, well, I wasn't afraid of getting hit later on in the game. We would go on to capture each other's pieces in a back and forth battle for the next few rows until my opponent decides to make a run for it. Luckily at that point, I was ahead in pips and I managed to win soon after. In the 4th game, my opponent quickly hits 2 of my pieces in my home board. And unfortunately, I was never able to fully recover from those hits. My opponent ends up creating a very nice home board while I was still stuck. My opponent doubles and I declined as my home board was very undeveloped. In the fifth game, I made arguably the biggest decision of the entire tournament to double my opponent while the score was 3-5. As we were playing to 7 points, this meant that if my opponent were to win this match with the double, she would win this entire round. My opponent accepts the double and it all comes down to this match. A while later and my opponent has built a solid home board, but I have still 3 pieces that I need to get past her 2 remaining blots that were on my outer board. If one of my remaining pieces get hit, I would almost definitely lose this game. Luckily, I managed to catch a huge break when I rolled double fives and managed to escape with my last 3 blots. I won the race soon after and now we are tied 5-5. It was now 1.5 hours into the entire match and both me and my opponent were starting to get a little tired. In the next game, I get lucky early on with double sixes. And both of my blots in my opponent's home board manages to escape. And as a result, I get an early lead. With 3 of my opponent's blots on my 1 point, I made the decision to double. However, looking back, it doesn't seem like a good double and XG confirms this. Honestly, I can only blame it on fatigue, and I think me and my opponent wanted this to end. Thankfully, my opponent was forced out of my home board due to forced moves by the dice. And I managed to win the round soon after.